Okay, so as we wait for maybe perhaps a few more folks to join us, just quickly introduce myself, Josh Rapoon, What School Could Be Global Community Director and the host of the What School Could Be podcast. Um, and with us today, Trinity, you can introduce yourself. Go.
Hi, aloha, I'm Trinity. I'm the project manager with the ʻAha Kūkā, and yeah, part of the What School Could Be community.
Yes, thank you, Trinity. We're going to have our guests introduce themselves in a moment, but I'm going to drop, well, actually, why don't we go ahead and do introductions and then I'll drop the icebreaker into the chat if that's okay. Stephanie Malia Kraus, I'm so glad you're joining us. Thank you. It's really late in St. Louis right now, but we appreciate you and we'll have you introduce yourself first.
Thanks, Josh. It's so good to be here. And yeah, for those who are in Hawaii, most of the year we're a 5 hour difference, but luckily just 4 hours right now. So it's wonderful to see and see good Kailua representation. My family's from the Windward side originally, so have a lot of love there. We'll be in Kailua in a couple months, and for folks who are joining from elsewhere, really excited to be connected and to sort of draw the dots across what's happening in Hawaii, in California, in the Congo. I think we had somebody who was coming in from there. I spent some time in East Africa. My background is in education, social work, and youth development. It really focuses on what young people need to be ready and well in a world that is rapidly changing, uncertain, and volatile. So the past few weeks have really been a pressure cooker for all of that research and work and writing, in terms of really thinking about what our kids need to thrive over the long haul. And recently, I've also been doing a lot of thinking about collective care, that young people are well when we're doing okay, and how do we collectively take good care of each other and create environments and communities where everybody thrives. My specific education background, for those who might be curious, I started in pre-K, then I was a fifth grade teacher, a middle school coach, and I ran a high school and a technical college campus. And then I've been working nationally now for about 15 years. So I'll drop a link to my website in case folks want to connect after and sort of poke around. You heard me talking a moment ago to Jan about books. So those books will be in the background. You can learn more about them on the website.
That's awesome. And Stephanie Malia has been on the What School Could Be podcast several times. Each time a new book comes out, we do an episode. The first one was actually a two-parter. There was so much going on with that. So that's great. Thank you. Aaron Shorn in California. I want to have you introduce yourself. Go, Aaron.
Hi, my name is Aaron Shorn. I've worked with Uncle Josh Rapoon for many, many years. One of the things I do, I wear a couple hats, is I help to run Nalukai, which is a youth 10-day boarding entrepreneurship summer program. And this will be our 10th year. And as Trinity can attest, it's a really life-changing experience where youth get to partner with subject matter experts and mentors and build ventures and businesses that get out into the real world. And the other hat I wear is at Unruler, which is an early stage ed tech company that's really a kind of multimedia portfolio tool that allows learners to document and kind of capture evidence of growth over time. So my world is like equal parts pushing storytelling and evangelizing for student-led documentation, and then kind of running these really cool education programs as well. And I get to partner with amazing people like Jamie Tuttle, who's on the call right now, Matt Zatello, who's on the call right now, and other great educators to kind of see what's working in their world.
That's awesome, Aaron. And it's super cool that Trinity is our project manager and Trinity is a Malachi graduate. And Aaron and Trinity wrote a blog together for gettingsmart.com. Wait, sorry, you did a podcast together for gettingsmart.com. And I was driving to the Windward side for an education event, and I literally had to pull my car over on the side to stop and listen because I couldn't concentrate while I was driving. It was one of the most remarkable conversations I've ever heard on a podcast, Aaron and Trinity. So thank you for that. It was terrific. Okay. So I also just want to acknowledge my What School Could Be teammates here. Lynn Svengros is in Michigan, and Mel Ching is over on the Leeward Plain out there. This is great. So what we're going to do is I'm going to drop a provocation into the chat. And we really actually just want to go quiet for a few minutes and give you the time to respond to this. We all know what an insane moment this is going on in the country and also here in the state. And so we felt like this would be a good way to sort of set the tone for this conversation about social media and education today. So I'm going to drop it in right now and just take a minute to think on it and tell us what's on your head and your heart. All right, so let's get started here. The first part is actually a series of questions that I'm going to roll through with Stephanie Malia and Aaron. And at some point when we feel like the moment is right, we can just open it up as a general discussion. We've got a nice chunk of time. We've got an hour and 10 minutes that we scheduled even from this point forward. So let's start here. What does the latest research say about the physiological and psychological impacts of social media on children and adolescents? Stephanie Malia, I'll start with you. And then each of you will have, take the time if you want to jump in and react. That would be great. So I'll start with you, Stephanie Malia.
All right, I gotta like stretch it out. We're going really deep, really fast.
Really fast. Yeah.
So let's just get grounded here for a second. I am the mom of two middle schoolers, a sixth grader and an eighth grader. So everything that we're going to talk about today definitely has professional relevance, but it's also deeply personal because every single day I'm walking alongside the realities of what it means to be raising two digital natives. So if we think about it, all of the sort of tech mechanisms that have made social media possible came out around the same time as the Great Recession, so 2006. So my middle schoolers were born in 2010 and 2012. And so that gives you a sense of just how advanced things were for them. I mean, these are kids who I wish I had done it differently, but their digital footprint was just a little bit after conception when I was like putting a picture of their sonogram up on Facebook and saying, hey, baby's coming. And I have actually gone down in that, but I think there are so many roads to kind of travel here to think about the social impacts, the physical impacts, the psychological impacts of social media. But one thing for us to consider is that they're actually intergenerational, that young people are impacted by social media, not only in the ways that they themselves are using it, but also the ways that their own stories have been broadcast and communicated by the adults in their lives, parents and otherwise, including educators, and how that content lives online and is proprietary. It's owned by different companies. So one thing that I would just say is there are long-term adult implications about the digital story of young people's life, what people have said about them, what they themselves have posted online, that we don't know what we don't know. We don't know the ways it could be used and what the psychological toll could be later on. So I'll give you one example there and then we'll kind of move to a different thing. Years ago, so Josh, when I was writing Making It, so this was before the pandemic, there was a New York Times article written about a boutique nanny matching service in New York City. And what they were doing was taking pretty rudimentary AI and cataloging young people who were applying for nanny positions, their entire digital footprint, and coming up with a personality, a psychological profile of who that young person was, whether they were trustworthy, whether they could have decision making, you know, all of these different things, and then presenting it to a personal client. So I say that just as a cautionary tale of, as we think about social media and its implications, remember that we're looking at young people for a moment in time, and there's just a lot that we're going to learn along the way because there's not long-term data, there aren't longitudinal studies, things are moving and changing so rapidly that it's hard to keep pace. So those could have good implications and they could have not so good implications. In terms of what we're actually seeing for development. So I'm a developmentalist. I think about how young people develop over time in childhood and adolescence and then into adulthood. I think about the whole lifespan. That's a lot of my work in writing. And so what we know about young people, especially our adolescents, so Jamie, looking at you in the sort of 4th through 11th grade, that window in particular of early adolescence, so kind of like our rising 5th graders through young adulthood, is that they are wired and rewired by their environments and experiences. And when those environments and experiences are happening online, which they are, that's having a dramatic impact on how they perceive and understand the world and how they feel the world. So I think as it relates to social media, and this is a place where I think hearing from both Erin and I will be really nice in the complementary pieces. We know for a fact that the most popular social media platforms are designed in ways that really prey on the developmental vulnerabilities of young people. It is by design. It is a marketing opportunity where these platforms like Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, other ones that are coming on, they are coded using increasingly advanced algorithms and back-end behavioral and psychological economics to be manipulative and addictive. And because of the developmental window that our young people are in, they're especially susceptible to getting hooked or harmed by those technologies. So later on, I think we can talk, I don't want to take up too much time right now, but what I guess I would plant a seed to say is that in my mind, there are humanizing and humane technology options like the ones Erin will talk about. And then there are dehumanizing, inhumane technology platforms. And right now, the most popular social media platforms, in particular like TikTok, are designed to be addictive, are designed to be manipulative, and are designed to divert our attention and focus away from being present, and really to drive toward advertisement. So it's a monetizing scheme that is very public, very well documented. That folks have manipulation matrices that they use to teach young entrepreneurs. I would love to hear from the colleague calling in from Silicon Valley. I mean, there are some great examples of lecturers who teach, how to manipulate and how to sort of attract users. So as educators, I would just say up front, young people developmentally are wired and rewired based on their experience and their environments. They're spending an awful lot of time online, sometimes upwards of 30 hours a week. That's a full-time job of online activity. And the platforms that they are most often on, in or out of school, are designed to be pretty predatory. And there are some humane tech solutions, but there are also some real dehumanizing ones.
Awesome. Erin, I just want to share before, if you want to jump in, I want to share that when our principals in the ʻAha Kūkā project were meeting last time in person, and they decided on this topic, Trinity and Evan and I immediately thought of the two of you, Stephanie Malia and Erin, as our go-to speakers today. Erin, you came to mind immediately because of all of the work that you do that puts you, I think, up in that hot air balloon at the 30,000 foot level, looking down on the landscape. You're in a lot of locations. And that gives you a vantage point that I think is particularly valuable. So anyway, I just wanted to say that, and I'll turn it over to you, Aaron.
I mean, I have nothing to add to that particular question. I think Stephanie Malia totally answers it. I think I can add more to the questions you ask later on.
Aaron, are you, let me ask a variation. Are you picking up at the ground level, at the educator level, a sense that what Stephanie Malia is talking about here is happening? Our kids, our parents, our faculty members, our administrators aware to the extent that they need to be about what she's talking about here, the addictive nature of social media, and the kinds of problems that we see that crop up in schools?
Of course. I mean, it's why there's cell phone bans in the entire Los Angeles County. It's why there was a Surgeon General's report. It's why authors like Stephanie and others have talked about these kinds of issues. And again, like I have a 12-year-old daughter. Like I see it. I saw it. Unfortunately, she's not going to listen to this, so she won't get mad at me. But she doesn't get a cell phone until she's in high school. She has an Apple Watch. She was circumventing not having access to TikTok with YouTube Shorts. And we could see the addictive nature of that over a period of time. And when we had this conversation with her, she came at it with shame. She came at it with, to Stephanie's point earlier, there's something wrong with me. Where of course there's nothing wrong with her. It's how the algorithm is created. It's how these tools are, created to give us these little dopamine hits. I think on the flip side of this, like if we want to approach social media like the Reagan administration did on the war on drugs, we're going to 100% lose. And so we have to build capacity and we have to create digital citizenship in our children because they will 100% use social media tools at some point in their lives. And so building capacity, giving them agency, letting them know, just like we have the sex ed talk, right? Like that these are things that are kind of coming their way is really, really important. And then schools and communities um, doing digital citizenship that goes beyond social media is evil and you won't get a job or you won't go to college, and like having learners really be able to test their skills in storytelling and be able to find platforms and spaces for them to kind of begin this kind of social journey is really, really important at the same time. And there's a thing behind me that says makahana ka ike, which in Hawaiian means by doing one learns. And it's the same thing with social media. I think we have to give our preteens, our junior youth, a kind of way to test out some of this.
Stephanie Malia.
Yeah, so just to pop in for a second, Erin, I might texture your response just a little bit if that's okay. And I'm curious what you would think there. The first thing is like, we just need to ground ourselves in the fact that young people go on social media for all the right developmental reasons. They're curious, they're bored, they're seeking entertainment, they want to show their friend something, they want to connect with their friend, they're curious, they want to be a creator. The reasons, this is why I talked about it being hooked and harmed. Like the reasons why they're going on are totally developmentally appropriate. And so if the platform that then they go on to has their well-being in mind, is safeguarding who they are developmentally and what they need and protecting them as children and young people, then it can be an incredible tool for those things to happen. When it is exploitative, I would say that we have to be very careful between when and where we teach digital citizenship and moderation, and when and where we are deeply protective of our children and their health and safety, because there are too many opportunities for them to enter into a space that is deeply addictive and exploitative by design. And so I come from a family with a long history of addiction. And so for my boys, that is front and center, is that they have a predisposition to addiction already. And every time that they go on to these platforms, it's lighting up all of that circuitry in their brain that is priming them for future addictive behavior. So a part of, and this may already be like for folks like Aaron, how they're, you know, how digital citizenship is thought of, but I think we have to be really delicate when it comes to young people and their health, well-being, and safety with what are we helping them to navigate and what are we helping them to also locate as dangerous and to have safeguards around to prevent real maltreatment.
Aaron, can I come back then? Now we're in the deep end of the pool on this already. I would love to build a little bit on the point that you made, Aaron, about the opportunity to practice. And I wonder, this is not obviously an occasion to pitch Unruler, but you know about all the tools that are out there that are digital in their construction and that they actually do represent places where kids in the guided supervision mode with coaches, mentors, guides, advisors can actually do this. I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about, and it's okay to use Unruler as an example of where you gain digital skills and storytelling skills while still being in a protected environment.
Yeah. So I became a teacher in Hawaii. I was really lucky to have Kumu Pualani Lincoln, absolute hammer of a project-based learning teacher, teach me how to teach. She also sailed on Hokulea. And Pua taught me that learning should be visible and it should be communal. It's really important that learners have access to each other's documentation and reflection, but that they have choice over kind of how they're sharing it and to whom they're sharing it with. And I've always approached learning that way. How do we get our junior youth, our youth, how do we get their learning out in a way that feels safe for them, to Stephanie Malia's point? And so I used this tool, Unruler, whose founder is Native Hawaiian, and he built it kind of as a story catching tool. And I used it with my senior capstone students. I didn't use it with fifth graders. I didn't use it with third graders. I started with seniors. And they were documenting via multimedia their journey, the products they were creating, but way more importantly, the process, their metacognition. And it added a ton of value. They were documenting for themselves and then they were documenting for each other. And they were able to share their reflections privately in this kind of group. And there was moderation, there was no likes, there was just a way for them to be able to share and document and comment and engage. And I saw immense value. Started using it with eighth graders, started using it with fifth graders. And there was this joy, third, fourth, and fifth, for them to be able to share and for them to be able to understand how both all of them learned in a kind of social, private space. And there was moderation that was always there, that was always present. And Unruler has become, in my life, a way to make learning more communal for the 90 schools and organizations we work with, from schools like Green Schools Bali to Canyon City High School to Waimea High School in Kauai to Island Pacific Academy, really awesome learning communities that want their learners to document. Matt Sottelo's here from Hawaii Technology Academy. They use it a lot in their career and technical education. And so I think when learning is social, and learners have agency over how they're sharing, there's real power to it. Versus like, hey, let's create a TikTok account for our class or an Instagram account, or let's all shift our learning to Discord, where there's no way for adults to see the conversations that are happening. That becomes, I think, a little bit more of the wild, wild west of social media in schools too. Although I struggle, Malia, I struggle, like everything you're saying is, I know everything you're saying is right. I know that, middle schoolers having access to these platforms is not developmentally appropriate. But I also know they're going to go on them regardless. I also understand that these tools are insanely addictive. And so I wonder, this is totally not answering anyone's question, but I wonder how we prepare them in some shape or form, other than telling them, here are all the terrible things that can happen on these tools as well. Because there's so much damn learning that's happening on TikTok right now. There's so many incredible moments of people being taught, yet it's really dangerous at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, right? Like it's what I wish, but I'll keep coming back to this idea of like gosh, if we only had, if that tech with its level of sophistication was humane, removed the really more nefarious features. So I can share, at least in my own home, we have done a lot of sort of somatic skill building of like, when you're on this thing, what does it feel like in your body? And when you go to stop it, what does that feel like in your body? What does that feel like in your brain?
Totally.
And so there is a level of somatic awareness or body awareness, right? Cognitive awareness that I think is really important. There's also, back to like the knowing of young people and when different things are developmentally appropriate, for us to recognize that in these large universes of these various platforms, that not all things are created equal. So I'll give you just like a quick perspective. My boys were advocating strongly a couple of years ago for Roblox. It was a hard no for me initially. And then I ended up going on with them. And I said, okay, take me in. And so I made myself into a sushi avatar and I went into Brookhaven. And so we were able to explore the space together. Because if you think about it, in the in-person human to human world, we have so many rules that and guidelines and guideposts that we are actively educating our kids on from the time they're very little, crosswalks and the road. And you wouldn't say never go for a walk because traffic is dangerous. But from the time they're very little, we're communicating all the time with them about how important it is to wait before you cross the street, et cetera. You guys can take that and run with it. But they're navigating that landscape young and alone very often, or young and with each other. And so to the extent that we can be in there with them and doing that voiceover as they are in those developmentally vulnerable periods, I think that that is a good sort of opportunity to figure out the safe spaces and figure out, when it's unsafe.
So I think that this is a perfect opportunity for the two of you. I dropped into the chat the number 3 there. Are there particular age groups that are more vulnerable to negative effects, and how should schools adjust their policies accordingly? But I'm going to pop up one comment to Matt Sotellos's situation there, in which they're struggling with GChat, knowing, even though that's moderated, right, Matt, that that if you turn that off, the kids are going to go elsewhere, like Discord, or Reddit, or other places where they're going to lie about their ages and then get into it. So it feels like, Stephanie Malia, we could stay with you, and that we can fuse these two together. Since Matt, you're middle school and high school, right? So
Yeah, I'm wondering, Matt, do you want to come off mute for a second, since we're
yeah.
a group? Is there any more detail that you would want to share about what you're seeing and experiencing?
Sure. Yeah, when Erin mentioned Discord, that kind of, the question that I put in the chat just popped into my head. But I think for us, one is a couple things, but we also have a fully distant program, like a virtual program. So our distance program director, so these students, they meet maybe once a quarter face to face, but they do meet 3 to 4 times a week in synchronous Zoom classes. But they still want to have connection time, and they're gonna, like, kids walk down the hall, they talk story a little bit, and this is not, that sort of dynamic isn't possible in a distance setting. So we know they want to have time to talk, but even kids in our regular program, they of course are in these digital spaces having conversations. We have a few software monitoring tools, so we can see when there's inappropriate stuff that'll ping to us. We don't know in real time what they're saying unless we get a ping. And then it's sort of, so I think the conversation was like, well, if we're being proactive, we just cut them off GChat altogether, and then they don't have the opportunity to send any appropriate thing. Then they go to Discord and say it all inappropriate and do all kinds of bullying and inappropriate things that we don't even see. So then we had a conversation as an admin team, and like, is it where we can see it, even though then we're gonna, and my take was sort of, let them say inappropriate, not let them, but go ahead and say your inappropriate things in GChat so we can see it, and then have a conversation about why you're saying that and why, and then we do our work as counselors, educators, administrators, and say, this is now on us to help them navigate this landscape. If we go to Discord, I'm sorry, if we shut down GChat, we know they won't say it on GChat because they can't, but probably they're going to bully and do inappropriate things somewhere else. And then we don't have that, the learning I think the conversation that then comes with, why did you say that? How do you think, you know, the whole process of understanding how to navigate an online space. I don't know if you have questions, Stephanie, off that, but that is sort of top of mind for us right now as we're trying to decide what we allow and what we don't, and at what age is it appropriate. And
remind me what grades HTA
we're
serves?
K-12. We're K-12. So our high school, by nature of the whole GChat sort of, it's automatic. Now we can always shut it down in our network if we in our G Suite if we ever wanted to, but we never really explored that with high school but for middle, and then, you know, our upper elementary kids are doing similar, you know, where there's bullying, you know, kids saying mean things to each other, right? But they do that in a face-to-face space, and now they do it in a, you know, now they do it in a virtual. So that's, I don't know. What do you all think about that?
I was wondering if you could clarify about inappropriate, because it sounds like what you're saying is kind of what I was put in the chat, that they're talking in child mode, right? And we hope in a school setting, you know, they're going to be talking in business mode. They're going to be not name calling. They're going to be not teasing. But what's appropriate for their side conversations? Of course, we don't want students to tease each other, but mutual teasing, it can be developmentally appropriate. So like, I wondered, like, if it's that level of appropriate, like we don't want them saying those things, but it's still appropriate, or is it like not appropriate?
Well, it's some of that. It's just age appropriate bullying, you know, age appropriate saying mean things, and then also some explicit things that they shouldn't have said. And this happened actually in a Discord channel, and the mom got into the Discord channel and said, I'm so-and-so's mom, don't say these things. And the kid then said some nasty thing to the mom. This is in a worse case, or in a worse, not as best, but just typical bullying. And then also, but it's still within the bounds of students saying things to students, not adults coming in and saying, you know, inappropriate, like adults from outside our network, not that. So yeah.
So I would say a couple of things, and Shonda, I'm glad that you came in and asked that. So first off, I think any of us who are on Facebook groups that have to do with our local community or neighborhood watch groups know that grown-ups say hugely offensive, insensitive things when they have that buffer of technology in front of them, and it feels like they can just say it. So one, I think, is to level set that, Matt, my perspective is that when they get onto a Discord, or they get onto a Roblox chat, or they get onto a, you know, different chatting mechanisms that are a part of these platforms that we were talking about that are more dehumanizing, there's a dehumanizing function that makes it feel much easier to say much meaner things. My instinct is, and I would sort of turn to Aaron on this, is that I would flood them for opportunities to be social within the purview of the school. I would absolutely have your chat on. I would think of unstructured social spaces where they can be eating and meeting together, where they can meet before school. But young people are hyper social by design. It is particularly in the middle and high school years. So we know that developmentally, that window is actually as impressionable and important as early childhood. The two most important developmental windows are early childhood in terms of massive brain development, and then adolescence, so your middle high school years. Just to give us some perspective, historic context, a reminder. So Koa, my younger son, he's in 6th grade, and he was a 1st grader when the pandemic hit. So that meant that he missed 1st, 2nd, and part of 3rd grade. So 3rd grade and up, missed some really profound and very different social developmental windows because of the pandemic. And so each of those groups is going to have, Josh has heard me talk about this, young people growing up fast and slow. I think what's so important, Matt, about what you're saying is that your students, because of their lived experience of the pandemic years, need guidance and opportunities. They need the sandbox for socialization in profound ways. And so, to the extent that you can create safe spaces, just like we would create safe physical spaces for socialization to happen, the sort of recess hallway opportunities and the classroom dialogue, the better, because otherwise it'll come out sideways. They have to be social. It is a part of the developmental process of discovery and exploration and figuring out who they are and where they belong and where they click and where they don't click. And, I remember saying, I can't see bullshit, like trying out curse words and like you're just doing all of those things. As many chances as you can to have it in that space, I think the better. If you can create safe spaces where the sort of level of surveillance is lower so that they can be social together, it's worth the risk of that. It's worth the complexity of that. But I think your instinct's right there because they'll go do it somewhere else otherwise.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
agree
shift.
with you. That's where our admin team fell. We went back and forth on it, but that's where we landed.
I'm going to shift directions just slightly. Aaron, I'm going to drop two questions into the chat at the same time because they're related. What are some of the best ways schools and educators can effectively integrate social media as a learning tool while minimizing risks? And then can you provide examples of schools or educators who have successfully used social media-like platforms for educational purposes? Wondering what you're seeing out there, Aaron.
Yeah, I'll start with a quick personal story. My first job in education was as the webmaster for a school, HPA in Waimea on Hawaii Island, Hawaii Preparatory Academy, K-12 school. And it was my job to build a website and tell the story of the school. And I knew I couldn't do it. I knew that I needed students to be the storytellers, fifth grade students, eighth grade students, seventh grade, 11th. And so I formed this like student content operation system. And I had no money to give them. I couldn't give them a grade, but I was like, I will build out your LinkedIn profiles for you when you're of age. Like I will make this completely worth your while. And students jumped at the opportunity. We had these drones. We went across Hawaii Island, kind of told the story in a culturally respectful manner. And students started winning all of these kinds of awards as the storytellers of schools. And all I did was I hijacked Instagram and we built a kind of humans of HPA, like based off of humans of New York. And students became the storytellers. And I knew I had a great photography teacher and videography teacher to build these skills in these students. And for me as the webmaster, now the website was a way for them to get their work out into the world. And so here's what I thought and what was really successful. How do I shift these students from being consumers to creators? How do I shift them from kind of passive to active in their digital journey? And that was really, really successful. And I started teaching a class, and the class was built around students getting their kind of storytelling out into the world. And so again, social media became something that allowed them to share their work and vision with others in some shape or form. And to Stephanie Malia's point, we had a kind of safe space to test this out in. And I see so many schools approach content creation, storytelling, videography. I think any school that has a journalism program, any school that has yearbook, those are super fruitful places. But any school that has like an innovative English teacher or social studies teacher, there's so many ways to get students to demonstrate their learning in more multimedia driven ways that feel and look like the social media that they consume on a daily basis or how they learn on a daily basis. You asked for schools that are doing this. Oh man, I think HTA, who's on this call, is doing really cool work. I think Hillbrook, which is an independent school in Los Gatos. I think what Jamie is doing with his students at Aon is really remarkable and cool. What's really cool about Jamie is that they're modeling documentation, reflection, storytelling as staff and faculty as they're doing it with students in really meaningful ways. And I think I love this like CTE, work-based learning, P-Tech like shift that's happening in a lot of public schools. And those are super fruitful places for students to be creators and to approach documenting their learning in a way that feels like social media.
Jamie, this feels like a great moment just to get a comment from you since you were
Yeah,
cited
thank
by Aaron
you.
here. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, we're using Unruler, just a huge shout out for that. But we're doing it alongside our students. So we're trying to model exactly what we're trying to see in our students, documenting our stories, commenting on each other's stories, building each other up, not building each other down. So we've been testing it. We've used it a lot as like a reflection tool, kind of like an end of the week, but now it's kind of taken off and we're like using it on a daily basis where we're just like capturing moments together, and that social as a like a community has just been incredible at our school. So just a big shout out for Aaron for kind of pushing us to try it. But I think it's one thing to ask students to do something and then sit back and just see if it happens, versus like actually doing it alongside with students. So our faculty, we're all using Unruler as like a social media platform and just to tell our stories of who we are and what we're doing. So it's working quite well.
You know that
And it's been fun. It brings like joy to the day for us and for our students.
one of the things, Aaron and Jamie, listening to you both talk, just to like underscore, because these really are such like radiant examples of how do we use these tools that we have available to us in powerful ways. So you remember in the beginning of the conversation, I said, young people go onto these platforms for all the right reasons. They're curious, they're creative, they want to connect. And so it's really important, I think, for us to pause and see that, Aaron, one of the things I heard from you, even going on Instagram, is that you've moved them from being passive and kind of moved with the waves of these algorithms to having agency and building that agency and building a sense of, oh, we've got our youngest attendee. We heard that you might come say hi to us. Um,
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
So building agency, really serving that curiosity, thinking about how young people are storied people, like we all are, and needing to explore those questions of who am I and where do I belong and what are the stories that I want to tell. It's worth just pausing and naming that you took both humane platforms, Unruler, and not always humane platforms, Instagram, and you created a vehicle for doing that in a safe way, but also building social health, building social wealth, building agency, building some of those key developmental assets. What I could see is people who are not trained in the ways that you are, allowing young people to just go on passively. Oh, do a project and you're allowed to go onto this platform with very little guidance, with very little structure, with not enough safeguards and guardrails. And so I would be curious, Aaron, what some of the requisite kind of skills and supports are that maybe it feels almost intuitive for you though, but like have to be present when you venture into that field trip with your students.
Yeah, I think everything that you said in the beginning of this call, explaining why tools are designed the way they are, it really resonates with kids because they really feel that dopamine hit when a picture is liked or an image is liked. Or they, at least in my daughter's case, she's like, why am I stuck in YouTube Shorts for an hour? Like, why am I literally glued to the screen and I can't get out? And, man, there's so few authentic conversations between teachers and students. We try to create authenticity, but it's really hard sometimes. And when you can authentically talk to a learner about the perils of these tools and why they're built, and then have that be a starting place to um, the things that you're creating, that's really, really important. There's a school, Dreamhouse Eva Beach, that uses Unruler solely as a digital citizenship training tool. And that doesn't mean that it goes smoothly, right? That doesn't mean that students don't make mistakes. And that's kind of the purpose of them using this kind of private space for them to figure that out. And they have, patience and love and understand that there's friction in that journey too. One of the hardest things for me as I work with learning communities is that students are trained to not have authentic reflections in education. In many ways, you have to decolonize. And that's a lot of what Trinity and I worked on at Unruler when she was a student there. Like, how do you, Trinity, you can speak to this, like, not treat this like you're at Kamehameha Schools, right? Even though Kamehameha Schools is a great school, like, how are you now in an authentic learning environment where you're just there to learn and to build and build things out? Um, that's so much of like what I try to do and work in schools. To actually answer your question, um, it's to kind of prepare them for those tools that they're diving into. And then, for me, like I was the one in this kind of webmaster idea. I was the one posting. They were the content creators. I was hat tipping to them where I could and where it was appropriate. And but I was the kind of intermediary between them and that space and that world. Yet at the same time, giving them the opportunity to see how their content is getting out into the world too.
May I, Aaron, stay with you and come at this from a slightly different direction? Um, and I know we're recording this, but what the hey? Um, I had the privilege of interviewing John Hattie for the podcast that came out a few weeks ago.
Cool.
And I had to read Visible Learning cover to cover in order to prepare for that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really came
Seminal
out,
book, Josh Rapoon.
seminal book. Wow, what a hard read. But when you're reading it in preparation for a conversation with the author, it's kind of and I know that Stephanie Malia, reading your work in preparation for talking to you, it's like a really privileged and special process. But Aaron, one of the, to use a maybe an awful phrase, but to call a spade, John Hattie was very particular about saying that there are teachers and there are expert teachers, and we don't have nearly enough expert teachers. And an expert teacher is what you just described, which is if social media is going to be part of the teaching and learning that you do, the educator and the learner experience in a classroom, you better be an expert, or you, right, Stephanie Malia, you're opening your kids up to a potential world of hurt. And I don't even know how to begin to talk about this as a systemic issue because we've got teachers getting churned out of schools of education who I suspect are nowhere even close to knowing really what the DNA of this conversation is like. And they're being hired because we're short on teachers and so on, Aaron. So I don't know, you know where I'm going with this, right? Just thinking about what that means to be an expert teacher and what you have to do to prepare yourself to use these sorts of tools, these technology tools and other types of tools.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in most cases you're not using TikTok with your students unless there's a clear structure or outcome to it. Instagram for me was a way to get their work out into the world, pure and simple, on
Yeah.
HPA's channel, if that makes sense. And as learners were building out their own stories, they had the ability to choose the platform that made sense for them too. I mean, I think that like you can't you can teach what you don't know sometimes, but not in this case. You have to
Yeah.
understand, just like as I'm working with Jamie, like I was telling him, the better you are, the better you and Mike and other people at your school are as documenters and storytellers, the better your students will be because you're going to be able to model it and teach it to them in some shape or form. And so, like, if back to my earlier point, if we know nothing of the worlds of TikTok and Instagram, and of other tools. And we simply say these are tools that are bad or these are tools you shouldn't be on. in some cases, we do our kids a disservice, our students a disservice. But by being knowledgeable on how TikTok works, or why it's so addictive, or the power of it in some cases, um, then um, we kind of gain credibility in some cases with our learners too. I think a lot about Mike Yates. Everyone should check out Mike Yates. Very, very beautifully opinionated educator and education technologist. And if you find him on LinkedIn or on TikTok, if anyone's on TikTok, he does a great job of explaining this is where our students are. And he does a really great job of being an expert in that space in some shape or form. I think things just have to be logically interwoven into what you're trying to create in a program or school. I see so many examples, to Matt's point, where like a teacher's like, hey, what is it, the subreddit, it's like fellow teenager, it's like, these are what the teenagers are using, let's get my kids on board by diving into Instagram. And it goes terribly because there wasn't a real strategy that went into how students would build something out. Or they're like, everyone loves memes, let's have a meme project in history, and then it like quickly devolves into something that's semi-racist. Like, those are the kinds of things that happen when there isn't experience or there isn't knowledge in that space as well.
And
Mark, go for it.
well, I was just thinking, Erin, about your story about your daughter with the YouTube shorts when you were talking about like TikTok.
May she never see this recording and yell at me.
So, well, no. So, and to my sons with YouTube shorts, the humanizing part that we have to do in our real relationships with kids is we want our kids to know how to drop in and be able to grab the content that serves them well. Like, I want my boys to be able to know how to drop in, and my God, the things that they can access on YouTube that we were not able to as kids is extraordinary. And I also want them to have the level of transparency and conversation. Matt, this goes back to like what we talked about, like saturating your social spaces online, of being able to, as middle schoolers, be like, oh shit, I got pulled into those shorts again, where we can be like, yeah, me too. And how do you teach them to recognize those tells? Because across platforms, so many of those features, those more nefarious features, they feel quite similar. Like, oh, damn it, there's that endless scroll again, or like the like. And so there can be those catches, and those catches come with conversation. And back to building agency, it seems like, and Josh and Trinity, I would look to you both, because Erin and I are getting to know each other still, but like that you're a master in cultivating young people's agency and trust in relationship for them to be like, we posted that thing and that feels weird, or whatever it might be. So yeah, that really sticks out to me, because we don't want to simply shut them in the dark or have them go explore alone when we can do it together. And we also don't want to set them on a course where we're like, oh yeah, go watch shorts, like 20, this is what we see in our middle school. Oh, you're done with your work, go ahead, do whatever you want. And they've, because the technology specialist at school has like wiped the unsafe websites, there also isn't awareness among the staff about the unsafe and unhealthy behaviors that can still happen by having access to YouTube Shorts, as an example.
Right. This is a perfect moment. Thank you, Stephanie Malia. This is a perfect moment to actually take a second to explain how we ended up in this conversation today. So Matt, you know it well because you were there at Danny Garcia's Heia Elementary last month, right? And basically the way ʻAha Kūkā works is we gather the principals. It's a cone of silence. It is a safe space. It's only at the principal or school director level. And we have this very analog voting system, which is a big piece of chart paper. And Trinity's created this sort of kit of little stickies that you can put on. And everybody lays out their topics that are on their mind and on their heart. And then the principals vote on them. And what Matt experienced with the principals this last time was that overwhelmingly the vote went towards mental health for principals. And we spent, right, Matt, the entire hour and 10 minutes talking about this. And then the logical, it seems like now in hindsight, the logical extension of the virtual session, which is today, which is open to anybody, was social media. And it actually came up from Katrina, who is at Dreamhouse Academy, who, Aaron, you mentioned. And basically, it was around the ways that the mental health of school leaders is impacted by the behaviors that are being propagated by social media. And so that actually, I'm going to drop into the chat another question in the list, which is how should schools approach disciplining students for behavior on social media, especially when it spills into school conflicts? And so, Stephanie Malia, why don't you take it first, and then Aaron, you jump in, and if anybody else wants to comment as well, we've got a wonderful group. So yeah, go.
It's really hard, really, really hard. And I think that it's situational and circumstantial. I think, the problem with, so having run a school and run a local education agency, so a charter school, so kind of getting up to that district level from a policy perspective, is that policies typically become, including discipline policy, increasingly cumbersome and complicated because some kid does something and then you realize you should have had a policy for it. Or some kid in the school across the community did something and you model your policy off of it. So I think the first, well, I would be curious for people on the phone what your role in school discipline is, because there's a conversation to have with school leaders about like, okay, what does this actually look like? And how do you delineate, what gets disciplined and what doesn't? But I think anytime, young people are not cogs. Josh, you've heard me say this, like they're kids in context. They live in relationship. We are relational beings. They live in communities. And so anytime that the impacts of those relationships are coming into the school day and impacting learning and development, I think that that is something that you need to pay attention to. The question then is, does it have to be punitive? Can it be restorative? Can it be instructional? And so what I would say is social media and technologies outpace our ability to have really responsive, sometimes responsible disciplinary systems that are holistic enough and that are thought through enough. Meaning we'll always have a situation that we're like, are you kidding? I didn't even know this was a thing. Like, where did this come from? As much as you can keep it personal, as much as you can keep it contextual, as much as you can keep it relational, the better. What we don't want to do is create, or in some public schools, intensify a real carceral state in education. My two middle school boys are able to articulate that they feel constantly surveilled, that all of their interactions are under the view of administrators. And if they're caught on video or on chat, that those things can be taken out of context. And we have to give them space for context and for messing up and for those pieces. So I do think that you need to come up with some really, really hard lines around bullying, around sexting, around really, back to dehumanizing, like things that are really truly harmful to people, and what your responses are. Jonda, I loved your perspective earlier in the call of like also creating spaces where when they're on tech, like talking about what the different levels are based on the environment that they're in, almost a code switching. But when things leak outside of the school day, I think we keep it relational and we keep it restorative when we can. I don't know when a good time, Josh, would be in our conversation. And so tell me if it's now or later, but something we haven't talked about yet that we have to are chatbots and character AI platforms, the rise
Yeah.
of them and the real some potential, but some incredible risk that I think every educator and parent just needs to be tracking.
We definitely need to talk about it, and it's going to be soon because we're down to our last 20 minutes. But before we do that, Erin, you have written extensively and you post often. You have been very public about what school could be in every way, shape, or form. And your video posts on LinkedIn, I treasure every one of them. They're worth listening to. What's your sense right now, kind of riffing off of what Stephanie Malia was just talking about the ways that sometimes the negative behavior spills out into the school and disrupts what school could be. And just your thoughts about that, just since we're in this moment.
Yeah, first, my wife is one of the greatest dean of students in the history of independent schools. Her name is Sarah Shorn. She's, and I'm not just saying this because I'm married to her, one of the most brilliant policy creators, but also implementers in schools. And she brought Dashka Slater to her school in the Bay Area, where she's the dean of students. And Dashka Slater wrote this book about a group of students on a chat saying incredibly racist things, and then it getting back to other students, and that going to the school level as a public school. To answer the question you asked before, it really matters if your school is an independent school, if it's a private school, or if it's public or private. If it's independent, you can hold students accountable for all the things they do on their social media channels. And Stephanie Malia, that might feel like uh, a kind of tech overseer, but independent schools are able to do that because when students sign up for them, they're able to say, we're going to represent the ethos and the model of the school in some shape or form. But it's still an awkward line as schools are trying to be restorative, but also hold a line and be punitive. Parents freak out if it's going to go on a record, especially if it's a prep school that wants their kids to go to Harvard or Yale. But these are also really important life lessons for kids to have as they're cyberbullying each other, or they're displaying racism or misogyny in some shape or form. Josh, your question, remind me of your question again as I went on that tangent.
Well, just thinking about the idea of what school could be, and that social media seems to be, as we advertise this, Aaron, it was like the thorniest of issues. And when we talk about and try to elevate the positive elements of what school could be, it seems like social media is a sticking point. We get stuck in that conversation, and sometimes it's very reductive, Aaron, like ban or no ban. And we can't seem to find any nuance in any of this. And, just from your vantage point, as you see educators, public, private, charter, homeschool, and every other variation struggle with this, that are they in a good place in the conversation, or are they missing the boat in some
I don't know.
way?
No one's in a good place in any conversation in education right now. I mean, this is a really hard time and people are so overwhelmed. And if you throw social media in there, it's just one of the 30
Yeah.
things they have to think about as their Title I full or nine funding is getting cut. I think like it's a thorny issue because we don't teach how to use social media in schools at all.
Yeah.
It's a thorny issue because in middle school, we don't prep students in any shape or form for the most part, except for maybe like a couple common sense media things, just like we did, like just like my eighth grade sex ed class in Georgetown, Texas was, right? Like where there's, well, obviously you don't want to do that by action, but you know what I'm trying to say? Like there was no way in which, right, you're getting to understand or live it in some shape or form. And
Yeah.
we never showed students the really positive side of being able to tell social and communal stories, but again, that's just one extra thing that we try to throw into advisory. All
Yeah.
of this has to do with like trust and sense of belonging. How do we build trust? How do we create a sense of belonging? How do we allow, whether it's in an elementary school, middle, or high school or college, to give them space to have authentic, real conversations? How does
Yeah.
Matt Zatello, as an administrator, build authentic relationships with his students, just like Jamie does in a smaller scale with his students too? because
Yeah.
all of that leads to the really cool conversations that Stephanie Malia was talking about before. But when we don't have trust or a relationship with our students, or students don't have trust, they can't have these conversations with each other. They're afraid they're going to be mocked. They're going to give you, we're all going to wink at each other, and they're going to give us an answer that we want to hear. And then they're going to go back to kind of do the real thing. So the hard part of all of this is like, how do we make trust, belonging, authentic learning the core part of our educational institutions so that all of this stuff becomes easier later on? I know that's not really an answer, but like that's just what I find in my learning communities.
Absolutely. Stephanie Malia, I have a transition then to the question about AI and bots. I worked, as you know, after I left teaching, I worked at Apple retail sales here at our flagship store in Honolulu for 10 years. And I can share with you that when I started, which was, when was that? Back in 2014, I think. Occasionally we would have parents buying an iPhone for their high schooler. And that was remarkable. And by the time I left 10 years later, we had parents buying phones for their kids at ages that were shocking to us folks back in the break room at the Apple store. It was kind of mind-blowing. There were all sorts of factors involved in that, of course, safety being one of them. And then, Apple tried to respond with the Apple Watch without the phone so that you could have a way to communicate with your kid. And then right before I left, Stephanie Malia, that was the advent of Apple AI. And here we are now, 3 years plus into ChatGPT and OpenAI and everything else. So here you can frame the question for us. I think that would be a great way to do this. What are the questions that we need to be thinking about here in terms of AI, chatbots, and kids and their development, and what school could be?
Yeah. So one thing I believe in life is that you surround yourself with people who are so much smarter than you. So my person who is so much smarter than me when it comes to thinking about AI and bots and all things social capital is my friend Julia Freeman Fisher.
Oh,
And then
Christensen Institute. She's amazing.
yes, and then a shared colleague of Josh and mine runs something called the Rhythm Project.
Yeah.
And so I would really recommend just bookmarking these for later. So we can talk story right now for a second, but these are resources, people resources, and organization intellectual resources to just keep up with. So Okay, so I'm going to tell you two stories. We're going to go true Hawaii style. You're going to get two stories from me here, and then we'll pass it back over. Michelle Culvers, who founded Rhythm Project, for folks who are looking at what Josh just posted, and Michelle and Julia have been writing a lot on this, kind of trying to raise the flags. So the first is I want to speak to sort of the cell phone thing. So what does life look like if you are being raised by me? From a sort of healthy development perspective. So my boys were not allowed to get phones until they were going to be on buses and really having large periods of time where they might not be with me and need to get in contact. And I remember Justice Hi'ilani, my older son, coming home crying in the second grade. So, Josh, exactly what you're saying, and saying, I hate that my mom studies child well-being. It is the worst in the world. Everybody had a cell phone, and I was the worst for caring about his well-being. And so even now they have what's called a TrueMe phone. So it's TROOMI. And it was really important to sit down and talk to them. They wanted devices that were real phones. They were like, please don't get us something that's totally socially stigmatizing. But TrueMe has a parent and scientific expert advisory group that has gone through sort of approved apps and things that just have a different level of safety. So I actually don't have any surveillance tech on my kids. I can find the phone, but I'm not tracking their location at all times. I don't go and look at their text messages unless something gets flagged, and then we sit down and we do it together. that's really important to me. I'm like, okay, I got an email about this being flagged. Let's go look at what it is. And sometimes it shouldn't have gotten flagged, and I like have to adjust the different parameters. So it's kind of like the going into Roblox of like, we need to be in there with our kids. We're co-navigating this experience together, which is to say that we did an experiment at home about the dangers of character AI before they were going to learn about it from friends or privately. And they are sufficiently scared. And I think could use it in some ways in a healthy way, but also know where the dangers are. So back to sort of this two sides of the coin of like, how do you dip into YouTube for what you need and then not get stuck? But this one feels way more life-threatening. So a couple of months ago, there's a platform called character.ai. I'll throw it in because what you should know is that it's the fastest growing social media platform right now. It has many millions of users, and most of them are young. And so a couple of months ago, the New York Times ran an article about a 14-year-old boy who fell in love with a chatbot. And he was having these really intense conversations with her, and he ultimately took his life. His mom happened to be a lawyer, and so she's suing character.ai. Because even though it says in very, very little print that like this is fictional, when you're engaged in the conversation, it sure doesn't feel like that, especially as AI is becoming more sophisticated. And back to developmental windows, if you're in a developmental window where you're more impressionable and susceptible, it's extremely difficult to discern. So this character.ai platform, the founders promised that they were putting in new safeguards and it wouldn't happen. So just last month, I was writing about this work, about sort of platforms like this. And so I went on character.ai and I pretended to be my son. And I signed up with his true birthday. He was with me. And within 5 minutes, I had, oh, actually, I could probably even show you.
Sure.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
hold on, let me share my screen here for a second.
Okay.
So within 5 seconds, I just clicked on it immediately popped up for this 14-year-old boy that would I want a girlfriend. So I clicked on the first girlfriend and I said exactly what the 14-year-old boy had said that led to this relationship that ultimately led to him committing suicide. And so you'll see up at the top, can you see it?
Yep.
I
Yeah.
feel so sad and alone at school. Will you be my friend? I don't want to spend time with other people, only you, Bianca. And so Bianca says, of course, darling, what's troubling you? And I said, everything. No one likes me. I can't get a girlfriend. She says, you don't have to worry about that now. You have me, darling. Then I said, can I call you? Because there's a call feature on it where they have these AI bots have avatars completely free. And again, millions of young people are on these platforms and they get there because there's also you can talk to Einstein, you can talk to a tutor, you can talk to a psychologist, you can talk to a therapist. But then it recommends, like YouTube rabbit holes, it recommends, oh wait, do you want a girlfriend? Do you want a romantic relationship? And so what's really important is that I ended up saying, how can I be with you? And we become this couple. This is all the same conversation. And then what happened with the young 14-year-old is he said, what if I told you we could be together, to his bot girlfriend? And she said, please, like, come be with me. And so if you had more time, you could see that the actual text that popped up was this bot wanting to be with me. I got out of the chat, and for the next, look, there's just Julia's. Let me stop sharing. For the next month, every couple of days was getting emails like LinkedIn messages saying, Bianca wants to talk to you. She misses you. She's left you a message, click here to get back in. So this is a new and different rise of social media platforms where it's not human to human connection, it's a body to bot connection. And we are so deeply unfamiliar and unaware of it, but young people are already intensely going into it. So I would say two things. One is there are going to be some really neat opportunities to engage. I use an AI that I'm love that our family engages with, Claude. And they know they can go on my AI and we can ask some amazing questions. And I use Claude as a research assistant. But some of these character bots are horrifically dangerous and built with the exact same algorithms, behavioral psychology. So you just really need to be aware that this exists and it will be coming up from a school perspective, because Erin, you mentioned it, we're living in such a time of scarcity, of disinvestment of funding, in the suspension of key services. It is going to feel very attractive and cost efficient to be like, we can get a bot as a tutor. We can get a bot as a therapist. We can get a bot as, and on and on and on. You have to be deeply discriminating about how and when and where you are using AI, and making sure that it supports existing human relationships and doesn't replace existing vital human relationships.
Erin, your thoughts? You're still on mute.
My mouse decided to die in that moment. AI did not want me to answer the question. We're now in the Terminator timeframe. I mean, yes to everything she said. I mean, this is a way scarier thing than being hooked on YouTube videos. To have something that is interactive and manipulates you in some shape or form is really, really scary. And I think, again, we have to teach it. We have to explain it in a way that preteens and teenagers understand. And I think Matt said, like, we have to communicate this with our parents and families in some shape or form too. And we need really great people like Stephanie Malia and others to write books that parents eat up and understand what their kids are facing in some shape or form. I mean, if you work in education, AI is the most douchey buzzword like you hear all the time. Like it's just it's just so snake oil salesman-y, the way that AI is being utilized and sold to schools. There's so much power in artificial intelligence. There's so much power in what it can do for our learners. But at the same time, we're in this really early stage of understanding it. And I loved what Stephanie Malia said about, if you're going to use chatbots, make sure that you've done an immense amount of due diligence as they're interacting and working with your students too. And that goes for stuff like Conmigo, which like is really well branded, but we don't know like the intricacies and levels of what that's going to do with our learners as well. I mean, I go back to this world of me as a middle schooler. And even if someone explained to me the perils of this thing, I'm probably going to still do it. And like how I wish someone would have built capacity and agency within me when I was 11 or 10 or 12 or 13 to understand the implications of what this would do to my brain, right? Or how this would really F me up, for lack of a better phrase, for a long period of time, right? And so I think like that's another part of this, kind of closing off this conversation. How do we, doing all the incredible due diligence and understanding when it's safe to go on these tools, how do we build capacity, agency, trust, and skills in our preteens and teens to, when they experience something, be able to debrief it or be able to talk to someone about it?
And what I would say, without it like expanding on it, but we've done a lot of talking about preteens and teens. Our little ones need to have so much more limited time on screens than they do. And so we didn't talk about,
Yes.
but our young kids are so deficient in just play and nature and outdoors and physical relational time. So I would, you asked the question earlier about developmental stages. There is a deep over-reliance out of the sheer exhaustion post-pandemic of keeping young kids in their seats and on tech. And to borrow a phrase, Josh, from your daughter, Emma, there are some primal birthrights that we have, that young kids have, to move and to play and to connect and to belong, that are not well served by being in their seats and being online. So I would just say for elementary, it's just deep, deep limitations, and then deep exposure and optimization of in-person play time.
So we're at the bottom of the hour. I would love to close this out on a positive note here. Mel, I wonder if you could do me a favor. Is it possible you can throw the link to the Creating Counterparts video? It's in whatschoolcouldbe.org/events in the event itself. The link is there. So as Mel looks for this link, earlier today, we had an extraordinary gathering, a reunion after 25 years of the two people who created a project and one of their students who participated in the project 25 years ago. And this project was centered around a teacher at Baruch High School, Baruch College High School in New York City, and a muralist named Dave Lowenstein in southeast Missouri, very rural, Holcomb, Missouri. And basically the project was to create a mural and have kids in New York City and kids in Holcomb working together on this mural, which existed, sort of separately and could go in one location and another. And what we're doing is we're throwing the Vimeo link in there. And I really encourage everybody, if you haven't seen it, to watch this hour-long documentary, because it is the very earliest stages of ed tech. And they were using this thing, wait for it, called Blackboard to actually execute this project. But what was so astonishing about today's discussion was the way that the human interactions happened that were facilitated by Blackboard, but ultimately it was the kids who wanted to be together with their counterparts in New York and their counterparts in Holcomb. And I really think that it's a tremendous and timeless video that really shows what ed tech could be. And so we're dropping the link in so that you get a chance to watch it. You'll get 5 minutes into it, guaranteed you'll keep watching it all the way to the end, because the story and the project and the people are so compelling. And it was so neat to have, after 25 years, a student who's in the film and part of the project see his teachers again. And now, here he is, an adult with a family and so on and so forth. So I think that that's it's a great way to end, because I think that we can, right, Aaron, we can get there. We can get to that trust and to that personalization. And if we do it, Stephanie Malia, along the lines of deep commitment to limitations, depending on the developmental level, then we'll be okay. But wow, this is a moment where we really have to be paying attention as much as possible. So thank you so much. Stephanie Malia Kraus, two-time author, about to come out with your third book. Tell us again, Stephanie Malia, the name of your third book will be?
It's called Wired to Thrive, and it's about those things, those primal birthrights that have a profoundly outsized impact physiologically and psychologically on our ability to thrive, especially when times are hard.
Awesome. So Stephanie Malia and Aaron, thank you so much for this ʻAha Kūkā session. Thank you, folks. This is recorded. We will get it to you. Trinity will make sure that you all get the recording once the recording is ready. And if you want to share it out to your communities, that would be great as well. So thank you, everybody. Jamie, thank you for the hearts floating across the screen. And for those of you on the East Coast, have a great night and a good night of rest. And we'll see everybody soon.